Okay, welcome back, everybody. Um, Welcome, dogs and humans, everybody. Um, yeah, I am so interested in hearing a couple folks share like what came up in those breakout groups. Did you meet someone new? Oh, always too short. Yep, I feel that. We love to talk at Asan. We love like connecting with people. Yeah, I wonder if anyone would like to come off mute or share in the chat something you learned, something that surprised you that you really liked about those breakout groups. I see a couple people like almost speaking. I don't know if anyone just would like to jump in and be the first person to talk. Okay. All right. That's okay. Maybe it's just something to keep inside, you know? That's all right. I feel that. So if anything comes up as we move through, feel free to put in the chat and I'd love to share it out so everybody can see it. Yeah, and I appreciate y'all for participating in those breakout groups. Yeah, and I hope it was good, even though I'm not sure. Yeah, I appreciate y'all. Cool. So as we continue to open up this session, open up this space, open up the Food and Farm Forum virtual sessions, really wanted to take some time to acknowledge whose ancestral and unceded lands we are each on. And yeah, just spend some time honoring these lands and those who have come before us. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to invite panelists to share what honoring the earth means to them. And if any participants would like to speak on this, would like to share where they're calling in from, Sophie will drop a link. So if you don't know which Indigenous folks land you are on, you can go to this link and figure that out. So I would like to invite panelists to speak on this, on what honoring the earth means to you as we open up this session. I'll be calling on people as we move into the more panel-y discussions, but I wonder if any of the panelists are called to share first.
Me to go first. I'm calling in from Bolbancha, the land of many languages, otherwise colonially currently known as, to most people, as New Orleans, Louisiana. I grew up in the northern coast of Florida and in southern Alabama, and I've lived here in Bolbancha for my whole adult life. I actually prepared like a thing, I had a lot to say, so I prepared a short thing to read, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
And so I kind of wanted to speak on the land acknowledgements specifically, right? Land acknowledgements are important, and they're also lacking for the most part, right? And so the land is central to our identities as Indigenous people. So we take this time, the time when we do land acknowledgements, when we open events, we take that time to center her. And I feel like I feel called to take the time now to feel what she is saying to us, her pains, her desires, and her offers to nourish us. We enter into a solemn agreement with her and each other to learn and live as family in respect and in community. The land includes all waters, all lives, all rock and leaf and microscopic and winged and many-legged nations, all who are unjustly subjected to modern society's human-centric lens. We must keep them their rights and their dignities in mind. Land acknowledgement is the first step in entering into a relationship with Indigenous peoples and with the land. It's only a first step. Just acknowledging that the land is stolen is not enough. The viewpoint perpetuates so much of the violence against Indigenous peoples and against the land. Indigenous peoples are still here, still fighting to protect the land and to act in sacred relationship between us and all the non-human nations of the earth. We need to honor our present as well as our past. Land acknowledgements mean remembering what the earth expects of us, the sacred instructions so many of our peoples were given since time immemorial. To walk in a good way, to only take what you need from the earth, to give as much as you take, to act with deep care and to speak truth with courage, to fight to protect the earth and those who cannot defend themselves, to understand that everything is connected and that walking in a good way means striving to be in right relationship with all things. Land acknowledgements have to be about more than acknowledging the caretakers of the past, more than placing the theft, violence against, and colonization of Indigenous peoples in the category of past tense and leaving it there. None of it is past tense. All of it is happening now. Okay.
Yes.
That was beautiful. I will try to follow that up a little bit. Thank you for that. I'm in East Alabama on Muskogee land, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, in that we are so disconnected from where our food comes from and the land that provides it. You have a lot of people, we go to the grocery store, and the grocery store fairy has shown up and all this wonderful food is laid out there for us, and we're so disconnected from that. And to me is in honoring the land and the life that it gives us is something that I'm trying to be more cognizant of and grateful for. So that's what it means to me. It's something that, as I said, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think that's the first small step that we can take, as I've started educating myself about a lot of that stuff and where this comes from. But it all, water is life, but the earth is life too. So.
Thank you. Oh. Angela, I would love for you to go. I don't mean to interrupt you. Thank you.
I was like, am I going to talk? Thank you, Warren, and thank you, Sasha. Sasha, myself, and Virginia, one of the other panelists, are in we're actually in a mutual aid community together, in a collective together. We could talk more about that later. But I am currently in Florala, Alabama, in Muskogee land as well. And I am actually of Muskogee, Cherokee, and Choctaw heritage. And I am here now in Alabama to become a better land steward for my ancestral homelands. And so I'm in the middle of creating an indigenous food forest to connect myself to the land and help with my community and help feed my community. Just as Warren said, like, just the last year of being here has completely changed my life in so many different ways. But just trying to honor what our ancestors did before us and continue to carry that on. So thank you guys for speaking to that.
Thank you all for sharing. Yeah, I'm just here resonating with that, and I just got chills when you said, Angela, that you're doing this. You came here to be a better land steward for the people that came before you. Yeah, that's so powerful. I think Virginia would like to speak next.
Yakukiyo, Lito, I'm calling in from Bobancha as well. That's the name of the city that I live in. A lot of people know it by New Orleans, but before New Orleans, this was already an international trading port. And my people, the Choctaw people, called it Bobancha, the place of meaning or foreign tongues, because it was a trading port. And I just want to say, Yakuki, thank you all for your perspectives and what Sasha shared especially was really beautiful. And what I would like to echo is that I also work as well as do mutual aid in this kind of environmental justice sector. And there's quite a bit of disconnect when it comes to protecting the land when we're not looking at it from this indigenous perspective of we're part of nature. Nature has a right to exist. All parts of nature have a right to exist apart from any benefit that they can provide us. They have the right to be here because they're part of this too. And part of our decolonization and part of what's going to help save us in this climate crisis is understanding that all of nature, all of this earth has this right to exist regardless of how it impacts us as human beings. And that we not only have privileges that should not be abused, but instead of thinking about what our rights are, we have to shift to thinking about what our responsibilities are, because we have benefited so much and we have taken so much, like Sasha mentioned, and we need to honor the land and honor all of the other life around us by being really conscious about putting back into it. And what does that mean? It doesn't always mean reinventing the wheel, right? It means going with the knowledge that our ancestors have gained since the beginning of time. So, Nakokiyo.
Thank you. Thank you. And our last panelist is Jennifer. I invite you to share what honoring the earth means.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Crossland. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a regional organizer with Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, and I live in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, also known as Choctaw Land. And this is a question that I think is something that is coming up a lot more and more as I do this work in the climate crisis. And it's really, as we think about it, honoring the land and start thinking about how we do that, and even just to Virginia's point about how we do that in a way of decolonizing process and as a solution to the climate crisis. It's some of the stuff that the question and the practices are some of the most exciting parts about this work. It's so rejuvenating and healing to think about how we do a better job with building relationship to the earth and to the land. Yeah, so I guess that's the only part that I wanted to add to what everyone else is saying is that I think, we honor the land certainly in the way that we have today to learn its history and connection to it, to do this work in a decolonizing way, to re-indigenize ourselves, to build solutions where we're in harmony around it, but also just like spending time, on the land and, in the space. So yeah, that's finding the wisdom in just being in nature. And that's biomimicry is something that I'm just recently started exploring. And I think that's like a really interesting thing as well, is what the wisdom that Mother Earth has to teach us. So, yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing and for grounding us in the land and in this conversation. And thank you, Sasha, for bringing in like land acknowledgements are important and a first step, and not a check off the list and not we're done, but an opening of the door. And thank you all for sharing about gratitude and ancestors, and Virginia for the call to decenter ourselves and really ask what it is that the earth needs and how we can be good stewards to the earth. And it kind of, I heard a humbling in what you shared. Yeah, and Jennifer for rounding that out with the healing piece of there's also something in our bodies that changes when we do this work. So I'm really grateful to all of you for sharing that, and hope everybody on this call can kind of help to holds that reality as we kind of move into the rest of the conversation. Because that's what we're here tonight for, to hold all these things together and to dive in. So yeah, let's start this thing. Let's keep this thing going. So as y'all probably know, tonight we are joined by these 5 amazing panelists. I'm just so excited to be with y'all tonight. They have all been working in climate community resilience, disaster preparedness, and mutual aid for many, many years. And this is such an important topic for us as folks working to build a just and resilient food system. Because we know that climate change is here, that it's increasing, and that during disaster, our folks are the ones who are often most highly impacted and receive the least amount of support, specifically farmers, Black, Indigenous, people of color, poor folks. And we also know that climate change is the natural progression of centuries and continual colonization, enslavement, and overall unrelenting exploitation of the planet and her beings, right? So these systems of oppression have fed us lies such as that we're safer if we like hunker down as individuals instead of sharing and like being in community with people. So yeah, I'm just really excited for this conversation, to start to get some lessons, some strategies that we can use to come together before and after disaster, come together in community and interconnectedness, to make sure our folks are safe, and to build the resilient food system that we all deserve. So yes, I just wanted to ground us in that, like why we are having this conversation, why this is so important, and why I'm so excited. So I think it's time for us to dive in. I would like to invite each of y'all in turn to introduce yourself and the work that you do. I think I'm just going to choose randomly and we can move through it. Maybe I'll go first to Virginia and then to Warren, and then I'll make the rest of the list after that.
Alito Sahachipayet, Virginia Richard, Mowachata Hoyosia. Hi, my name is Virginia Richard. I am a Mowa Choctaw woman. I live here in Bovancha, but my tribe is in South Alabama. The work I do is professionally, I work with, how to best put this, trying to empower frontline communities with tools that maybe they normally wouldn't have, or know that they have access to, and building networks and relationships there. And then really why I'm here today is because I've had the privilege of being in the Bovancha Collective with Angela and Sasha and a couple of other people who are not able to be here tonight. And we came together right before COVID, before we knew that COVID was going to be a thing, and began intentionally building community. And I give really big kudos to Angela for that intentionality as well, that helped set the mutual aid networks that we were able to provide and plug into in motion for the pandemic. So when you're thinking about like what can we do now in terms of preparing ourselves and making ourselves more resilient, that intentional community building is everything.
Okay, hey y'all. I, of course, am Warren Tidwell. I'm the Community Resilience and Outreach Director for Hometown Action in Alabama. I've only been doing this kind of work for a couple of years with an organization like this. The majority of my experience is the grassroots level out of necessity. I come from northwest of Birmingham, West Alabama, which if you're in Alabama, you know we get a lot of tornadoes. So growing up, it was continually cleaning up afterwards. I'm a blue collar guy and I was a mechanic, worked in a shop for years, and I finally felt this moral imperative that I had to do more. I come from the rural South. If any of y'all have heard of Saragossa, I would be shocked, but that is the unincorporated part of Walker County I come from. And I saw how the rural communities where I come from and where I'm working in were forgotten, left behind. And of course, as we see climate change and the effects of climate change worsening, as we are all very aware, those are the folks who pay the highest cost and will be the first to be affected. We work building community resilience hubs through certain small towns out of regions, relatively new in this particular kind of work, but it all came from bringing folks together for disaster cleanup and a desire to build something sustainable, not just reacting every single time a new disaster occurred. And it's, I spent 2 years in Pearlington, Mississippi as a volunteer after Hurricane Katrina became known as the forgotten town of Katrina, that unincorporated area of Hancock County on the coast. And I saw what happens when people are forgotten about. And I saw what happens when people don't feel seen or heard, and it's heartbreaking. And so I set out to attempt to do something like that, something about it, because it's my people. And along the way, learned a lot about how it's not even just, people think of the rural South, they think of folks, they think from outside the rural South, they think that they look and sound like me, right? But we have a very diverse rural South, and it's become a good bit of the work has become setting up systems. I did mutual aid for a long time. I had no idea what mutual aid was, but that's what we were doing between communities and between people, but setting up systems and projects to protect our people, protect folks in marginalized communities, and to hopefully create a structure that is sustainable and is something that will be of benefit to the folks who are far from the spotlight generally and who are often left behind. They're in the in-between, in the margins. And we've got to figure that out because, of course, climate change is going to affect those communities drastically. So.
Thank you, Warren, for sharing that and bringing your story of like doing this work out of necessity. I always love hearing how people got into this work. Let's go, Virginia, Sasha, and Angela to finish this question up. Oh, sorry, I said the wrong name. I meant Jennifer, Sasha, and Angela.
I was like, my name wasn't called.
I'm sorry,
maybe it's me. It's totally fine. We needed the laugh. That's what happened. That's that space. Okay, so as y'all know, Jennifer Crossland. I'm a regional organizer with Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, rooted here in the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where I've been doing organizing work for guess about 10 years now, doing work around disaster recovery and response, equitable disaster recovery, a lot of my work around that, energy democracy, and stopping the petrochemical build out, environmental justice work in Pascagoula was actually the first campaign and one that I'm still working on, an important part of my organizing work that actually, is part of the work that I do with the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, but also also sort of separate. So because the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, our work is regional, right? And so I do, local work in my own community and area. Keeps me grounded for sure, but also with Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, my work is movement wide and sometimes takes me all throughout the South. And so with Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, we are a movement building organization, and that, through facilitative leadership, work to create structural shifts, right, towards ecological equity and climate justice, particularly in the Gulf South, and centering communities of color on the front lines of climate change. That's the nature of our work. And so my work takes me throughout the whole region, but also we're very much a part of Southern organizing in general, through the Southern Movement Assembly, as well as Southern Communities for a Green New Deal and the Southeast Climate and Energy work. That's a big part of our work. One of the major programs of Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy anchors is the Gulf South for a Green New Deal formation. And that's a particular formation that it really is rooted in decades of organizing and relationship building. Our organization started in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And so we've been organizing, building relationships since then. But in 2019, all of that relationship building and organizing culminated in the creation of the Gulf South for Green New Deal formation with the launch of the policy platform and a shared vision and values around how we can address the climate crisis in a way that is unique to the South and the Gulf South in particular. And so a big piece of my work is facilitative leadership through the establishment of infrastructure to advance these visions, right? And so setting up state hubs and collect community controlled funds, which we'll get, I know there's some other questions coming and I can get into more of that, but yeah, so that is me and Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy.
Thank you for sharing that. The little taste of, and like wanting more. So yeah, we'll totally get into that. Sasha and then Angela, will y'all introduce yourselves and the work that you do?
Oi, I'm Betty Washte. Hi, good evening. I'm Sasha. Obviously. My wage work is I work for PowerShip Network as the convergence coordinator. I was recently hired in July. My job is to put together big youth convergences events where kids learn to get skilled up, connected, build community power, from the lens that all liberatory work is climate work and all climate work should inherently be liberatory work. So we are focused on the climate crisis and dismantling the petrochemical industry and resisting massive industry, and while also understanding that those fights are also in so many other liberatory fights, taking down toxic prisons, the end of gender discrimination, the end of transphobia, abolitionism, like all of those things are interconnected because all liberatory work is climate work. I come from a working class background. This is the first non-physical labor or service industry job I've ever had. So I really resonated with Warren when he said that he's been doing mutual aid forever. He just didn't know that's what it was called. I grew up on Pensacola Beach before it was expensive. If any of you know where that is, on the northern Florida Gulf Coast, it is, our house got knocked down plenty of times by hurricanes. And so you walk outside, you find somebody's boat a chunk of their house, you bring it back to them. So I've always been rooted in that. And so even though I'm very passionate about the work I do for my job in bringing youth and leaders and building new climate leaders and connecting all of these things, my work is always as a community herbalist and working in mutual aid and building on a deep community level is really what I consider my work to be. And what I am lucky to do for my job is an extension of that foundation of mutual liberation and mutual aid.
Hi, everybody. As Songo, I am Angela Como. I am originally from Bobancha, which is the Choctaw word for New Orleans. I was born and raised there. Because of that, we went through many hurricanes. So again, like we all have this living on the Gulf Coast, I think we just most of us have a history of having gone through natural disasters. My wage work is, I am a research nurse, a clinical research nurse, which is completely different than what I do outside of work. I initially went to college for environmental and sustainable resources, so I've always been an environmentalist. However, life happened, and as a single parent, I put myself through nursing school because I needed to support my child. However, I've always been an environmental activist. My mother is an herbalist, and growing up in the Gulf South, my family was Acadian. My dad's family in Louisiana was Acadian heritage, and they were fishermen. So I spent my entire childhood in a boat in the Gulf of Mexico, and I've got to watch the Louisiana coastline disappear my whole life and be destroyed by the petrochemical industry and by natural disasters. And I'm still watching that to this day. I recently moved about a year ago, as I said earlier. I moved to Alabama. In part, it was kind of the retirement dream, was to eventually get land and live off the land. Retire in my 40s, but COVID happened, and I was like, what is the world going to look like in 2 years? I don't know. Like, why are we waiting? Let's just do it now. And so now I'm working from home, but also I'm here in Alabama with developing this food forest. It's going to take me quite some time, but also in part because an elder, my mentor, was like, I need you to move closer to me. He's actually in Atmore on the Porch Creek Reservation. And he said, I need you to move closer to me because I want you to help our community with herbal medicine. And I want you to learn our ancestral ways. So that's why I'm here. The food forest is also an extension of the community work because of climate change. There's going to be food shortages, there's going to be food insecurity, there's going to be so many different things, a cascade of things that are going to happen. And so I wanted to start building an intentional community for my children, for their children, for my community's children, for my entire spiritual and Indigenous community, to be able to have a safe harbor, to start working on that, because it's going to take time to build. So everything that I do on a day-to-day basis is built on that. I'm also part of the Bobancha Collective, which Virginia and Sasha spoke to earlier. We started as just a group of Indigenous people that were getting together in New Orleans, just because New Orleans does not have a Indigenous cultural center. We're working to change that. And we're like, okay, we have all this in common. We're not part of a reservation. We're not part of like federally recognized tribes. We're all just kind of scattered here. Let's get together. But COVID happened, and we realized that we all had skills that were useful. And a lot of us were herbalists. So we started to create herbal medicines to donate to the community for COVID precautions, for COVID help. Also, then natural disasters started happening. So then we're like, and we had the George Floyd protests and all these other things just started happening. So we're like, let's just get this medicine out to help people. And so that's how we started our mutual aid work. So anyway, I could keep rambling, but I'm going to pass it back to Mars. So that's who I am, and that's why I'm here.
Yes, that was not a ramble at all. That was like exactly right. And each and every one of you, thank you for sharing. And I feel like I know y'all a little bit better now, and I'm ready to get in. So the next question, is really, I'd love to hear why y'all all are putting community into this work. Like, why is community critical in disaster recovery and climate preparedness work, mutual aid? And also maybe if this resonates with you, to speak on the way that bringing community, centering community in this work helps to move us beyond just responding to each crisis in the moment, and helps us to have a longer view. So yeah, why community? Why is this community-centered work? Okay, let's go Sasha, Jennifer, Warren to start.
When I hear why community-centered work, I almost have a problem answering that, because the idea of this work not being community-centered is completely foreign to me. I'm like, how do you do this work any other way? How do you coexist any other way? I don't really know, but what I can say is the gifts and the joy of community work is really that's the resilience that it brings, the fact that there's always someone to pick up where you've left off, that there's fail safes, there's all that community care element. The amount of environmental pressures and that are going to come from the climate crisis, and that we're already seeing, is going to require all of our ingenuity, and it's going to require all of our working together. If we're all like siphoned off into our own little burrows and hoarding, we're never going to make it. That's about it, really.
When you said it's going to require all of our ingenuity, oof, I got shivers. Oh, thank you. Yeah. And thanks for reframing that. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Y'all, I totally forgot who I said next. So just
that was me. Yes, thank you for that, Sasha. I also got, it's going to require all of our ingenuity, and really feel that. And also just the reframing of the question. It does seem a little absurd that you could do climate justice work in a way that excludes community. And like, the thing is that it does happen though. There's big green organizations and things happening, moving that do not center community. It's replicating this sort of same oppressive system that we're fighting. And like, so one of the things I think when you say like, why community, it's like, the solution is community. The solution is, community-centered in practices. And so we need to embody the change that we want to see, right? And so I think also when we talk about community, what became apparent when we, the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, as I was saying before, was an organization that was born in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, like so many other organizations born, maybe not just of Katrina, but even of disaster with, in the last decade or so, we've seen a lot more mutual aid organizations and other organizations that happen in response to crises. And it was, we identify Katrina as a climate disaster. It was, certainly a warning shot early on. We know that because of the warming temperatures, that particular disaster was, that hurricane was as bad as it was. And what we also saw, that was a warning shot for what was to come in terms of the response to a crisis of that magnitude, a disaster of that magnitude. The failure of the federal government to mobilize resources to folks who needed it was very clear, right? The inequity in recovery for those who were the most hit, worst impacted, but also had the least amount of resources to recover, were not given their fair share, and sometimes even left out of that money and that recovery. And so, here 16 years later, you still have communities that are haven't fully recovered. And so for us, community becomes very clear that community is part of the solution, because governments aren't going to save us, and they're in fact going to let us down in a lot of ways. And so, mutual aid and community governed response is a necessary part of the solution. I do know, like, I was one of my first jobs organizing was actually with another organization that also formed in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and they organized to organized again, pressuring the state and the government to address inequity in recovery, particularly around housing. A lot of money was going to wealthier, a lot of the housing recovery was going to wealthier households, predominantly white households, while low income and people of color and Black communities and so forth were being left out. And because of the community came together and organized and put that pressure, they were able to get money redistributed, right? So, mutual aid and resistance and, organized communities coming together to seek that policy change. Those are also like important parts of why community needs to be centered in disaster preparedness and response. I also, in the same vein of what I was speaking to earlier about community and mutual aid and things like that, one of the things that we recognized was that, or really just when you look at both, whether you're seeking policy changes or you're filling in the gaps, the most important thing, what became clear to us with the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy and all the 16 years of organizing we're doing, is that we needed to know each other. Right? We needed to know each other in our state. We needed to know each other across the region. And then just to Sasha's point, like, the ingenuity of all of us, all of us hold a piece of this puzzle, right? And we needed to bring folks together. We needed to know each other in a particular kind of way though, right? Not just know who we are, but also be able to pick up the phone. Right. That's a particular kind of relationship. And we also needed to be in accountable relationships to each other. Right. And so, one of the things that this work around Gulf South for a Green New Deal is this formation is we are in accountable relationship to each other because we have a shared vision. We have shared values that we've committed to. Right. And we are driving this work together and holding each other accountable. Also, within the organizational structure, each of the participants are also tied and accountable to a community. This is a formation of organizations that are accountable to people in their own community, whether that's a nonprofit organization or a church group, right? Or a book club, but they're accountable to people, right? And so, moving in this way, accountability becomes an important part of building relationships and moving together. And, the benefit of that, of building relationships and accountable relationships really revealed itself in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida and recently, right? Because we were able to establish this infrastructure to set up community controlled funds, we're able to create a process to receive funding that could be quickly distributed, that was controlled by community, quickly distributed to people on the ground and those who need it most. And we moved quite a bit of money. It certainly wasn't enough money, right? But it was a starting place, and we could get things that where people most needed it. We could mobilize, other things like solar generators and get it work with because we have a particular kind of relationship, for example, with the United Homa Nation, right? Like they told us how to come into that place and you know, how to, you know, it wasn't somebody who didn't know them coming in trying to give them what they need, which is also sometimes the charity model, right? So we were being directed because of our relationship with them, being directed by them and able to meet and show up in the way that they needed us to, rather than just going without, you know? I think that's what I wanted to say is, yeah, community definitely essential, and particularly about, you know, building accountable relationships. It's important that we know each other, and in order to do this work and to be able to prepare and respond to the disasters we know are still coming. So.
I believe I'm next. Thank you, Jennifer. You're exactly right. I often think about April 27th, 2011, and you're in Alabama, and many of y'all probably know about the tornado super outbreak that happened that day. We had 67 tornadoes, and over 400 of our residents were sadly killed. And I say however, that I got to have a front row seat to my state's finest hour, because the communities and the way that they came together in the aftermath of that tornado, how they worked together across race, class, all of that went out the window. And I hate that disasters occur, but you often do see the best in humanity in that aftermath, because those communities rally around each other. It reignites that sense of community within them because they are responding. There's a book that I really like. It's A Paradise Built in Hell. It's by Rebecca Solnit. And it's the extraordinary communities that arise in disaster. And from a horse ranch in Hackleburg, Alabama, leading the effort there, to an elderly couple in Flat Rock in Jackson County, very isolated community, leading the effort there, the average people who come together, the community leaders that are built in that are really something to see. The thing that we have to figure out when it comes to community, because I'm like all y'all, if you're not doing this, community is where this is at. It's where we have the basis of all this. What we have to figure out is on the before the disasters occur, right? Bringing these communities together, building these networks, connecting folks, so that we're not, you know, building those things, because it happens really rapidly. But it happens in fits and starts in the aftermath. And all of y'all, I mean, a lot of y'all, I'm sure, have worked those. And seeing how that happens. So that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. And I'm sure someone else said it, but I say it all the time. We need to build more front porches. Our folks don't talk to each other until that disaster or that thing happens within a community that forces them to come together. And then you see these extraordinary things happen. I want to see it happen before it. You know, I know y'all do too, and how we do that. So that's what community means to me, because you see the absolute best of all of those folks. And it's about, to me, y'all consistently hear me say this too, about building these sustainable efforts beforehand within these communities, community-centered efforts. So thank you.
I was on mute. Oh, yes. We need to build more front porches. Charlotte in the chat is adding front porches and passenger trains forever. Yeah, we need to be talking to each other and building that trust to call people up, like you're saying, Jennifer. Yeah, exactly right. I'm gonna pass it to Virginia. No, Angela, and then Virginia. I'm so excited to keep going. Okay, Angela, what you got?
Well, you know, and there's a few points that, like, I just want to reiterate. Like, most of us are Black, brown, poor, disenfranchised, whatever. Do we really trust the government? Like, are we really going to trust the government to come and save us? Are you kidding me? Like, when have they ever helped us? When? Please tell me. Like, I lived in New Orleans for a lot of my life, and at one point I was an urban explorer, and that means going into abandoned buildings, taking pictures, doing things like that. One of the buildings that I went into was a huge stadium that was abandoned post-Katrina. And it was somewhere they actually would hold like huge basketball games. It was an arena. The entire bottom floor of the arena was full of pallets that were 8 foot tall, stacked with supplies for Hurricane Katrina. It is still sitting there to this day. Granola bars, water, MREs. Like, I went in there in 2016, and there are still hundreds and hundreds of pallets of supplies that were not distributed. What happened? Like, we're really going to trust the government? Come on, y'all. Like, it's really sad. And growing up, one of the first major hurricanes that I went through was Hurricane Andrew. I'm going to date myself by saying that. I was in high school when Hurricane Andrew came through, and it really hit South Louisiana very hard. And we did not have electricity for 3 weeks after the storm. We did not have running water. My entire neighborhood came together. Like, one neighbor had propane, one neighbor had had a big giant deep freezer and had a generator. We had an above the ground swimming pool. So like, we had no running water. Everyone had a time that they would come bathe at our house like that. And then like, everyone stored the meat and the food in the other neighbor's freezer that had the generator. And we all, like, for a month solid, we became like a giant block size family. And that's how we made it through the storm. Like, that's how we made it through that month of terribleness after the hurricane. And this happens all throughout the South. And it really blows my mind. Like, my neighbors now currently, they stockpile. They're like, oh, I have like so many rolls of toilet paper, there's supply chain shortages. I got us covered, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, they say that, but they'll be the first people to give you anything you need. So I really feel like when stuff, just like Warren said, when stuff really hits the fan, that's when it comes out. Like, people want to help each other. Humans are social creatures. We cannot survive without each other. And what are you going to do if you stockpile everything, disaster happens? Are you just going to live isolated for the rest of your life and like be constantly worried someone's going to come steal your things? Is that the life that you want to live? But we really do have to get better about getting stuff in place prior to the storm. We really worked closely. There's actually a member of our mutual aid collective that is a United Home Nation. She's a member of the United Home Nation and actually lives in Houma. And it was really terrifying. Like, right up to the point of the storm, like, oh my gosh, is their stuff going to be okay? Like, it really showed us, even though we've been through it a million times, we really need to be prepared in advance. What can we do to get prepared in advance? What can we have in place? So we're actually still trying to figure that out, as a small group. So.
Ready?
Yeah, perfect.
So what Angela was talking about actually kind of takes my answer on a different turn than what I was expecting, and I have notes that I'm going to get back to. But having worked in a volunteer capacity for search and rescue operations during flooding and storm situations, Angela does bring up an excellent point, and one that I think a lot of people who have worked in similar capacities did bring up in the preparation and aftermath of disaster. You are part of the community, and so while you shouldn't hoard and you shouldn't go nuts, you are first and foremost responsible for yourself. And by not taking care of your needs and preparing for you and your family, then you are placing a burden on others. And we see this with search and rescue, especially when evacuation orders are called. There's always, people, you don't want to leave. But if you do leave and you become trapped or something, if you don't leave and you become trapped, then another community member is going to have to risk their life. Their family is risking losing someone to come out and save you. And that's not to say that your life isn't worth it. It is, but if you have the capacity to, as much as you can, take care of yourself as an act of love for the community as well. Because we have this really unhealthy idea that it's like all or nothing, and everything for everyone else. Well, then if you're in a survival situation, then you become more of a liability, because now people are risking their butts to come and save you. So don't be greedy, but also and be generous, but also be prepared and have a level head on your shoulders and think about what you need to do. And even if you can't do it yet, because it's an act of love for yourself, because some people really struggle with that and feel like they're being selfish if they do that. If you can't do it as an act of love for yourself, do it as an act of love for your community, recognizing that they care about you and they want you to be well. And so you're helping them by helping yourself. But that being said, it's not all about helping yourself. Obviously, it is about radical generosity and opening your arms. So don't get me wrong on that. I'm not advocating for rugged individualism or anything like that. The beauty of working in community, I once heard somebody or read somewhere that it's like a choir. And the beauty of so many voices in a choir is that when you're holding a long note, you can take turns taking a breath, which is something that we have had to do time and time again, especially with this pandemic. It's this prolonged crisis mode. And it looks like we're just gonna continue operating in a way in crisis mode. And so the beauty of that community network and relationship and knowing each other is not just being there when somebody says, hey, I need a break, but knowing the signs of when they're ready to tap out and getting in there and helping them out. Jennifer and Angela and Warren, Walt and Sasha all talked about the effects of individualism. And as an Indigenous person, what I see in our traditional communities versus communities that have really internalized more colonialism is that I think, we have a very collective mindset, and I think that I think that rugged individualism is in a way engineered to undermine the power of the collective, because it stymies change and power among oppressed people. And by somehow associating being in community with being weak, we've by internalizing that message rather than realizing that it's an external message that is not here to help us, we hurt ourselves. In community, we continue to learn from each other and empower each other. And for example, like in Bolbancha Collective, we have so much in common. I also studied environment and development, like environmentally sustainable development. And there's so much overlap, and yet also because we're big nerds and we all go down our own rabbit holes, there's so much nuance that we learn from each other. I also wanted to reinforce that, we cannot and should not think of the government as our friend. Jennifer started talking about that. The others carried that out, especially from an Indigenous perspective. The government is never your friend. But I'm just telling you that no matter who you are, the government is not your friend. They do not have your best interests at heart. We see that time and again. My personal philosophy on governmental participation is more of one of like harm reduction rather than solutions. Solutions are going to come from people on the front lines, because people on the front lines are the ones who know the problem better than anyone else. We see that issue in environmental groups and in the environmental narratives. I often tell people that there's like this national and international narrative, and there's a regional narrative, and then there's a more local narrative and a more ultra local narrative. And generally, the higher on the philanthropic ladder you are in receiving funding, the further that narrative is away from what people on the ground are experiencing. And that's because people in power have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. And so there's really a lot to be learned at looking at and picking apart narratives about our environment, about our food, about who we are as people and who we are as communities. You see this in coastal restoration. You see this when it comes to food and so on. So also, and yeah, Jennifer, I think you just had a great answer to this question, like everybody did, but I really loved a lot of what you said. And you made an excellent point about accountability as well, because trust is central to doing the work. When you start to build trust and when you start to have actual interactions with people, and it's not just transactional, but you're building relationships, you can love those people better. Sometimes it's hard because like you're not going to like everybody. Like that's just how it is. Not everybody's going to like everybody. But when you're in community and when you're doing more than just transactional relationships, you get to know that person as a person rather than as a role or what they can provide. And you can love that person. And when you love that person, when you love that community, you're going to naturally want to operate in their best interests and operate at your best so that you can uplift the entire community. So that's what I got.
Wow. Everyone's paying attention to this, right? Like everyone's hearing all of these gems that people are just dropping left and right. I'm feeling myself just get full up and just full up with gratitude and knowledge. And I have so much to chew on. I know I'm going to be processing this for a really long time. I'm just really grateful for the generosity of all of your answers so far. And just, yes, hitting the nail on the head again and again and again. Mic drop again and again and again. Y'all, brilliant. And where I would like to go next is something that many of you kind of spoke on in your last answer. I'd like to spend a little time talking about this interdependence, this like being in community, right? Like I know for some folks, like a lot of folks on this panel, it sounds like that feels pretty natural. Like that's the way you grew up. Like, of course, like this is what we do. We share, and when things happen, we take care of folks. And I know for other people, it might not be a muscle that we've worked as much, right? It might feel a little foreign, like a little unknown or scary to us. And so I would love, and I know some people already started bringing stuff out around like, we need more front porches and trust and building accountability. I'd really love if we could make a collective recipe for interdependence. Like if you were to make a recipe to like potion brew interdependence, what would some of the ingredients be? What would some of the steps? Be to kind of make this interdependence brew? Or how do you practice it in your life and in the work you do? So is that question, I know it's a little bit of a funnier question. Is everyone cool with that? Good with that? Okay, cool. All right. Let's go. Ooh, okay. I like have to make decisions. Okay, Warren, and then Sasha, Angela. We'll start there.
It is an interesting question, and it is a good question because you're forcing me to think. I mean, I preach interdependence a lot, and reminding folks that we're all in this together, and we are, you know, the cavalry's not coming. We need to be working together on these solutions. And I have very simple worldviews and how I apply them to the work that I do, and that is just connecting people, the right kind of people. So I am thankful I'm going first, because the very easy answer to this is human beings, people who want to do the work. You know, it's been a struggle at times, trying to figure out how to convince folks. It's like the saying, I don't know how to teach you how to care about other people, right? So how do I convince you that interdependence is something that we need to focus on? So I'm going to say a heaping helping of people, and a great deal of education on that. I'm going to pass it to the next person who will undoubtedly give a much more eloquent answer. So whoever wants to take this on, please do. Takes me a while to think through things. I apologize.
No worries, Warren. No, that's exactly right. And I feel like the front porches is also another ingredient that you already mentioned.
There you go.
Like,
I'm throwing that in there too.
Spot on.
Front
Yeah,
porches. Yeah.
You got
I'm
that.
borrowing that from earlier. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, most definitely. Sasha, I pass it to you.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking before even thinking of ingredients, I thought it made me think of the way that my grandma cooked, and probably the way a lot of your grandmas cook, which there's no measurements for anything. Everything is like a pinch, your palm, you just stir it till it feels right. And that seems like actually really like important for this, right? That it's not precise. It will change with the humidity. It will change with the time of year you're cooking. It's going to change with how sweet you want those cookies to be this time, right? And so thinking of that sense of connection to like your grandma's, like connection to your heritage, that and the repetition. Your grandma could do that because she'd done it so many times, because it had become such a part of the way that she fed herself and her family. Like you learn how things feel. It's tactile. You do it enough that it becomes second nature. And I think that that's the goal, right? That we do this, we and interface with each other in these ways. We have these communities and everybody's on these front porches, right? That it is our second nature, and we don't need to think of specific measurements, and we don't need to necessarily think of strategy in that way, though obviously being strategic is important, right? That it can just be the way, like, yeah, I just keep going back to that sort of idea that like the recipe is we put these things in and we just know how it's supposed to go.
Yeah, I love how this is, yeah, someone said in the chat, this is a country recipe. It's a Southern recipe.
Anytime I'm on a panel, it's going to be y'all. So there you go.
Which is exactly right, because that's who we're talking to, and that's the feeling we're trying to, that's who we're trying to be interconnected with. So I appreciate you, and what you said about that's why she's done it so many times. That's why grandmas can just do it by feel. We got to get this being like second nature. Ooh, okay. All right. I'm ready for the rest. I'm trying to get myself together. Angela, can I pass it to you? Are you ready?
Yes. I can't quit smiling with the heap and helping thing. That's so that's perfect. So my suggestion for the recipe is, sorry about the road noise. I found with the George Floyd protests, like, because our community are activists in a lot of different ways. We're not just environmental activists. We're not just food sovereignty activists. We're just we're really passionate people. I think all of us in our little group. And you have to remember, I think it's a lot of us, and we saw this as well with the Ida, Hurricane Ida, the aftermath of that as well. Everyone wants to help, and everyone's like chomping at the bit to like do stuff, or not. Like, they could be terrified. Let people do what they can. There's no shame. You cannot, like, some people are just like super righteous, all about like, I want to save everyone. It's real ego driven. Ego gets in the way. Like, ego can hurt people. We really need to let people, like some people say, fit in where they get in. Like, if your thing is to cook for people and feed people, that is, everyone has to eat, so like, let that, like, there's no shame in not being a hero. Find out what people's skills are, skill share. Everyone has a part that they can play, and let the, work together to make things happen. I think that's the cohesiveness of the recipe. You have to let things marinate, So.
Solid marinating time. Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. And before we go to the last two panelists, I just want to say we'll have some time for questions and answers, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll make sure to ask those to the panelists. Okay, let's go Virginia and then Jennifer to finish out our recipe. It's smelling good already. Like, I'm ready to eat.
So in terms of community, just a personal note, I'm in this weird place where I kind of was raised in two different worlds, in this indigenous world and also in non-indigenous world, and we operate very differently sometimes. And because of that, sometimes I have trouble trusting, and I'm very selective about who I'm in community with. And kudos to Angela and other members of the Watcha Collective, because they kept intentionally including me until I was finally like, okay, I guess they're cool. And because there's everybody has their own stuff, and not everyone is where you are, and not everyone is ready to participate in the same way that you are. And so being intentional about being inclusive and reaching out without being pushy, and just forming those relationships, that goes a long way. Because the way I became part of this is Angela kept inviting me to stuff, and then like they were like, we're gonna start calling ourselves this, and we've got a website. And then I was in a group chat. I was like, oh, I guess I'm in this now. I didn't know, but here I am. And then like 2 years later, I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. Yeah. Another thing is like, I think for a lot of us, especially people who are neurodivergent, a lot of times we really struggle to understand where our gifts, where our ingredients fit in, because we've spent much of our lives not having them understood and not having their importance understood. And they're all important. Like, everyone has important ingredients. So bring your ingredients. Don't feel like you have to like change your cinnamon into cardamom. Don't feel like you need to hide your mint and bring bay leaves instead because everybody else likes bay leaves. Like, bring what you've got, because sometimes what you've got is the ingredient that is going to make that recipe pop, and people don't even know it. So just do it. And it can be scary, but there's been so many times where I've had a skill set that I didn't even connect to a project, And then I jump into it and I'm like, oh, I can actually do this thing over here that you guys need somebody to do. Or maybe people don't even realize it needs to be done, but you're like, oh, we totally need to be thinking about this component. And I can do that, or I can teach someone else to do that. And then also, yeah, to echo what Angela said, just like taking care of yourself is part of love for the community, so is trying to not be a superhero, because there are often very good things that people want to do for the wrong reasons. And so continue to think about, again, what's truly best for the community. So like, for example, there is a natural disaster and you want to rush in and bring aid. One thing we think about, because I studied international development, a lot of people want to bring aid in. What is that aid going to do when it floods local markets? Who is putting out of business? Who could you buy that aid from instead and put money into those local markets? What communities or groups can you invest in instead? And how can you also, build those networks? So yeah, how do you keep yourself from becoming a liability? A really poignant example of this is, for a long time, and I don't know if it's still true, but when I was in college, it was that all U.S. food aid to countries with famine, by law, had to benefit the United States in some way or another. There is no helping people for the sake of helping people when it comes to the government. And which is a personal note, like why I never went to Peace Corps or Foreign Service or anything like that, because you start to see how the sausage is made and you're like, yeah, like there's a lot of good intentions on the ground, but upper level, there's no helping people for the sake of helping people with the government. So after I think it was an earthquake in Haiti during the Clinton administration, the United States poured in rice as food aid. And while that did help feed some bellies in the short term, what it did in the long term was it crippled local farmers, it crippled local biodiversity of food, and it caused a whole new generation of people to grow up dependent on cheap imports and nutritionally deficient and without connection to their land and to their local plants and food sources. So when we're thinking about building community, what is the way that we can come in and help people without hurting them? And a lot of that, I mean, the answer to that is, I think, is to come in and say, hey, what are your needs? These are the resources we have. How can I help you? What do you want? What do you need? And how can I help you achieve that?
Thank you. Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the right question, framework. Thank you. Okay, Jennifer, round us out.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm like gonna round us out or sort of take us in a little different direction. I love everyone leaning into this metaphor and like measuring with the heart by how you feel, and the heaping helpings, and all of that. Bringing your own ingredients. Like I'm getting so inspired by just listening to all of you and like thinking, wow, that is not how I thought about this question before coming to this meeting. I do appreciate the metaphor, recipe metaphor, for those of you, sort of like a we haven't launched the program yet, but we're Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy is going to be launching a okra project, which is a storytelling project that has lots of food metaphor, because food is like so culturally important to our region and part of our movements. And, you know, when we gather people, like, we don't like not feed them, right? Like, that's a very, like, you've got to have food, right? You got to feed them good, delicious food. And so recipe metaphors are just, I get so excited about it. And also, I think, like, when we're talking about the climate crisis, agriculture and the agricultural industry as it currently exists, right, is like a big part of contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions, and a big part of the problem when we're, you know, looking at it, you know, addressing this crisis, right? And so, you know, the role of food and how we rethink our relationship to it is going to be an essential part of addressing the climate crisis and advancing climate justice. And so, yeah, so loving the metaphor and the recipe. When I was thinking about this, I wanted to take a step back, because I was thinking, like, you know, we have this recipe. And so my mind went to, like, what exactly are we building? Everybody, I think, like, gave all these, like, delicious ingredients and, like, all these very tangible things of how we show up in the movement to build community and interdependence. But my mind, like, went back to academia. So I have a political science degree, and there is something called interdependence theory, right? Like, I learned this in college. And so the theory is that we have a global economy that is interdependent. And the more that states could be interdependent, the more stability we have within the region and across the globe to prevent war. Right? That's the idea. And so the reality is that we have an interdependent global economy, like, that exists. But what goes along with that, and what I also learned, you know, what we're learning in school, what's being lifted up with this sort of global interdependence that we're creating among states, is also this narrative of or the system of extraction, exploitation, right, of oppression, being sort of manifested through, you know, international trade agreements, through this global agricultural system that we talked about, but also, like, through the World Bank and the IMF Bank and the advancement of neoliberal policies and things like that. And so what really resonated with me when Virginia talked in the last question was talking about individualism being engineered to undermine collectivism, right? And, you know, because individualism is a lie in and of itself. There is, like, no such thing. No one lives on an island. Like, it doesn't even exist in reality. Reality is we are interdependent. It's these narratives and systems that are designed around this value, something that is not even a lived reality, but around a value of individualism that is, you know, the thing that we need to shift, right? And so, you know, when I think about interdependence is our reality, and, like, a lot of people spoke to that in really meaningful ways, right? That's how we live, and we see that show up more in nuanced, more obvious ways in disaster. Warren talked about that, and in communities coming together to meet needs. I think Angela was telling a story, right? How her community showed up with each other, So sorry, I sort of lost my train of thought, because, like, I'm answering this question, like, a little bit differently than I thought. But so when I think about interdependence and what we're trying to, the recipe that we're trying to create, I take a step back and I think about that, you know, interdependence as it exists today in the global economic and political system is one that is married with exploitation, this idea of scarcity, with oppression and extraction, right? So the kind of interdependence that we want to create is the kind that is where community has control over the resources. Community has control over the production and the redistribution of those resources, right? And so I think that, you know, when we think about what are the ingredients, I think everyone gave like personal ingredients, but also I was coming at this question thinking about like, where that sort of vision, right? Like, what is it that we're trying to create? And that for me is, you know, community controlled of housing, healthcare, food, water, land, energy, right? And so interdependence, when it is, even though it is our lived reality in a lot of ways, but we're making a distinction here as a lived reality where community folks, everyday folks, localized, are able to have control over their own resources. And this includes the production of their own resources so that we can all better survive and thrive together. So that's, yeah, so taking that question just a little bit differently, but that
was right on. Yes. Yeah. I think that is a beautiful recipe that y'all just co-created together, and just, yeah, adding into it in the chat. I really love how all of y'all took that and ran with it. And Virginia, I am going to be thinking about what you said about like, don't try to be cardamom if you're bringing cinnamon or something. Like, I'm going to think about that for a really long time. That was really powerful. I forgot to lift it up earlier, but that really hit home for me. Yeah, thank you all for sharing on that. So now we can open it up to a little bit of Q&A. I think we have time for a question or two. So folks can drop in the chat or press the little microphone and come off mute to ask your question. It could be to the whole panel or just to one panelist or a couple panelists in particular, whatever you're called to. Yeah, okay, who has questions? What are y'all curious about? Okay, Charlotte, I see you.
Hey y'all, thank you so very much. I'm just taking this all in and just feeling real full right now and really hungry for that soup or that cornbread or whatever it was. I'm hungry for it. So my question for all the panelists is, given the collective decades of your experience in the room, what advice would you give for people wanting to begin working in their own communities? And I was just hoping that maybe you could be kind of specific about when you've seen these rumblings and beginnings happening in your communities, and what were the elements of that? Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'll just let folks jump in when you're ready. Yeah, is anyone ready to go first? Charlotte, it was a doozy of a question. Yeah, I think it's just a little time to think is always good.
I'll say the white guy's gone first a lot, so I'm not going to do it. Y'all don't make me do it.
Great. I love that. I love being conscious of that. I think, Virginia, you're going to say something?
Yeah, Jennifer's unmuted as well.
Oh,
Go ahead, Virginia. Go ahead.
We can rock, paper, scissors or something for next time. I was just going to be really frank and say that like my entire life has been a series of, I think like divinely intervened stumbling. I don't know how else to describe that, but yeah, I can't take too much credit, and I guess a lot of it was intentional, but in a lot of ways it wasn't. Like, there are just certain things that really ingrained in me, and that when I was doing or I was around, I felt most alive. And following that, opened doors to people who felt the same way or had similar experiences. And it's kind of just been, like I said, this like divinely led stumbling into community with people and following your gut and doing what you see needs to be done and that you're also passionate about, because sometimes there are so many needs and so much that needs to be done, and it's all legitimate, and it all needs to be addressed, but don't ignore the thing that you're on fire about. And I know that sounds like a super individualistic answer. I don't mean for it to. Just being candid that like there's a lot of intentionality, but there's also just like a lot of what people would chalk up to be dumb luck in some of this.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And y'all, I haven't been looking at the time, and I've just been so focused on this conversation. So maybe we can hear from one or two more panelists, and then we'll actually have to close this session. Yeah, so who's being called? I see Angela's unmuted.
Jennifer Jennifer was trying to go earlier, so if Jennifer
I was, but now if we only have one
Don't
or
be
two,
shy.
if we have space for both of us, I'll go. But if not, Angela, go ahead.
Okay.
So my advice, well, I'll frame it with that I'm definitely a people person. Like I've always been a people person, and as a nurse by trade, like I love my patients. I love people. I care about people. My advice is to go and just spend time with your neighbors. Go and spend time with your elders. Go and spend time with your community. That is like the first step. Like just, you would want someone to sit with your grandmother and see what she needed and just listen to her. Sometimes people just want to talk. Like just go sit and talk. And that's how you start building that community. And that's when you find out what people need. And that's how you find out how you can really help them. So that's my advice.
That's spot on. Yes. Yes. And I was just seeing a lot of resonance, panelists and on screen with other people. Porches, y'all. So it just says in the chat. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Jennifer.
I was gonna say, something very similar in the sense of, and then what Angela just said reminded me of what Virginia said about like falling in love. Like go fall in love with each other. Like, and so I think like for me, one of the lessons, particularly like I came into this work right out of college, like no organizing experience, and organizing, like certainly organizing along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and that's my community, but like organizing in low income, predominantly Black communities, that as a white person, like I was really did all the wrong things, like didn't take the time to build relationships and trust and like learn the history, right? Like I think like this culture of white supremacy really sort of informs an approach that is like solution oriented rather than relationship oriented, right? That helps us like that sort of gets us into this place of urgency, and just especially when you're talking about the climate crisis, right? Like so much is so urgent and you're just like trying to fix this. And there were so many times where different campaigns fell apart, and it wasn't just me, but that I've seen where if trust wasn't built, on the onset, things just really collapsed. And which brings me to my second point, which is expect conflict. Plan for it. In fact, like integrate in your planning, like healing and conflict mediation and things like that. Like that's, if you're doing organizing work and you're building power, which requires that we do like multi-identity, multi-issue work. Like if you're really doing that kind of work, then, all of that culture that we live in, right? This, colonized, white supremacist, ableist, homophobic, transphobic, sexist society that we live in, all that junk is going to come up. And it's gonna show up. And so, you know, it's going to create conflict, and we just need to figure out, instead of running away from it, figure out ways to confront it and deal with it and heal from it, because that is the work, right? We talked about it. That's like, we build community in the mess of it, right? That we fall in love with each other despite all of the differences and all of this, like, ways in which these larger systems and narratives have separated us and pitted us against each other. So that's mine.
What a note to end on. Just like, go fall in love with each other. Go love up on each other. Go build relationships and just listen. That's exactly right. Oh, y'all, this has been so fun talking with you and just learning from you and just being in conversation. I'm really, really grateful to everyone here and everyone in attendance. We have a little bit of a surprise, so stay on to the end. I promise it'll be worth it. Yeah, just like a round of applause and gratitude for each and every one of y'all panelists. Maybe we can drop some love for them in the chat, maybe share something that resonated with you about this conversation. I know I was just resonating all over the place, so it might be hard to choose one, but I invite you to share that in the chat, something that you're taking out with you. Yeah, and while y'all are sharing those things in the chat, I just want to have a little moment to talk about Asan. Asan is a membership organization, and we, over this past year, we've been in a membership scale up to deepen our commitment to being a values-driven, farmer-centric, and member-led grassroots network. So we're strengthening our collective muscle to address the most pressing challenges that farmers face, like access to capital, access to land, environmental threats, climate, like isolation, all these things that we've been talking about. And so grateful to have this conversation as a grounding in that work that we're doing, and just invite everybody here, if you're not already, to become a member today, if you're feeling called, if you're vibing with this network. So Sophie will drop a link to sign up for membership. And yeah, that's the membership pitch. I want to read some of the stuff that's going on in the chat. There's a lot of gratitude. There's a lot of love. Someone saying they're taking front porches and mama cooking from this, that had them. Yeah, just more gratitude. Yeah, I appreciate hearing all the experience and the work. Yes. Oh, yes. So Virginia's hungry now. Yeah, there you go. Me too. It's about to be eating time when I get off this call. Yeah, and Alice says thank you to everybody for sharing your cinnamon, cardamom, mint, whatever it is you bring into the recipe. Y'all are all making this happen, right? Yeah, grateful to you. And now it's time for the surprise. So I'm gonna, Sarah, are we ready for the surprise? Okay, we're good to go. I might just let it speak for itself. Sarah's gonna share something that they were working on during our session. During our whole session, they're graphic recording and making notes of everything we're talking about. And this is it. This was our conversation laid out visually. So this will be shared after the event, but just wanted to spend a little time to share it right now. Yeah, I'm seeing some mouth drops, some wows, beautifuls. Yeah, this is gorgeous. This is gorgeous. We need more front porches. Yes. Oh, Sarah, this is lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes. Look at our brew, look at our marinating time, heaping, helping of people, all that. Yeah, good old country recipe. That's how we do it. That's how we do it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, yes. That's the question. That's right there. And it starts with the trust in the people. So, I'm so full up, y'all. It's so rad. Yeah, it's so rad. Just Sasha, Sarah, you're getting a lot of love in the chat. Thank you for sharing that. And we're excited to share that later on with all of y'all. You'll get in your emails and everything. Yeah. All right. It's time to close out. I'm gonna leave with that. All right, y'all. Go fall in love with people. Go love on people. Go sit on porches and do your thing. Thank you for everyone who came tonight and sharing everything you shared. Hope everyone has a good night. Bye. Thank y'all. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank y'all for having us. This was awesome.
So glad you're here. Thank you. Y'all are, my cheeks are.
Mine too.
I so appreciate y'all. Thank you. Really good to spend time with you and get to know Virginia and Sasha. Yeah. This was such a good way to spend my night. So
Y'all
grateful.
too.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go get some food. Let's go. Let's go sleep or whatever we need to do.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Bye, y'all.
See
Thanks
you
y'all
later.
so much.
Bye.
Good night.